I'm Mark Eckhart. I'm a partner in Undercurrent.
I look at it and I smile. So share that smile with everybody here today.
That's awesome. So gang, that's Rob Shuham, who's the founder, co-founder of Undercurrent. We have Howie, who's manning the controls. He's the man behind the U there on your screen. And then we have Greg Berdulis, who is today's featured domain expert. Welcome, Greg.
Thank you, Mark. It's really nice to be here with you, Rob, and Howie behind the scenes, and with more people that are connected to Undercurrent. Welcome. I'm glad you're here.
Yeah, that's awesome. So Greg is part of the Undercurrent team, and we refer to him as Greg, lovingly refer to you as Greg the Monk, which is just so awesome. I'm going to say and share a little bit more about Greg, and then Greg, would love for you to just kind of fill in the canvas there as soon as I'm done. So here's what I've captured, and here's what I'm excited to share about you. Greg is a mindfulness coach, teacher, and facilitator. He founded the Power Presence in 2008 to bring what was hidden in monasteries throughout the world to the world and to the people and to the masses. And by that, I'm referring to techniques to relax the body and focus the mind and touch eternity. Really great use of the word eternity there, Greg. So cool. Since making that commitment, Greg has been called on to work with executives and professionals at Google, Facebook, eBay, Capital One, Crispin Porter Bogusky, and more. He believes that to benefit from mindfulness, you don't have to shave your head and disappear for 7 years. He and I have similar cut. I think yours is a little tighter than mine. And you just have to train your mind regularly and properly. It's simple, but not easy. And that's why for millennia, teachers around the world have been guides and served as mirrors to those who've pursued the practice. From it all, here's what Greg has learned. And I love his summary or summation. He's not a perfect monk, but he is a happy monk. And that happiness point is really, really essential. On his website, he shares that acknowledging imperfection is wisdom. Recognizing our power to influence our mental and emotional states is terrifying and ultimately liberating. So Greg, I would love for you to share your background, your influences, and how you got to doing what you're doing and what you're really kind of immersed in and most curious about today. And I'm going to tee this off with a question that I just ripped off from your website because I thought it was so great. Here it comes. So I'd like you to respond to this. As a child, my curiosity led me away from home so often that mom pinned a note on my shirt. My name is Greg Berdulis. Please call my mom at 256-0893. That's right. So as that is a leaping point into you and your background, there you go. Let's have fun.
Okay. Well, thank you. You know, it's been a while since I wrote that, and I realized that for a child to have that much curiosity, that he feels good wandering out into the big world, it means that he has a sense of safety. Like he feels safe, or he feels safe with himself, he feels safe with adults, he feels safe with his brothers and sisters, and it's from a sense of, I wouldn't say non-vulnerability, but a willingness to explore what else might be here. And to some extent, I believe that curiosity began to turn inwards when I suffered my first deep depression. And I wasn't suicidal, but I knew that I did not have the energy or the interest in living. If a bus took me down, I would not have what it took to recover.
Wow.
And it was that depression that eventually sort of kicked me into a much more rigorous spiritual practice, particularly meditation. And by this time in my story, I was in Burma, and I had ordained because I realized meditation was so hard for me that I would take all ways ways that would be helpful. And a monk in Burma is considered the son of the Buddha. And I thought, wow, with that kind of orientation, that could be really helpful. And I needed all the help I could get. The other reason that I became a monk, though, is because in Burma, when you walk into the dining hall, the monks are first in line.
There you go. Strategic move.
Let me see if there's anything else to say about that. Yeah, so I was a monk for 7 years, and then when I learned that my father was dying, that was the lever to bring me out. I wasn't eager to leave because I was quite happy as a monk. I mean, there's very few responsibilities, and there's such clarity of mind and heart that emotions seem like they're few and far between, which for me meant that there was this general sky of contentment. Mm. I suppose you could call that an emotion, but the way that it showed up for me is that emotions were more like clouds that occluded the sky, or the blue sky of contentment was what was left. I wouldn't call it ecstatic, but it was a profound state of peace and enjoyment, while recognizing that things are constantly changing. So there's a sense of the radical impermanence of the moment, but also of life. And to be that settled in my mind and heart that all of this became apparent to me was part of a learning that I don't think I could have gotten from more graduate school studies. Yeah. After I came back to the United States and my father died, by the way, that was not a big deal. He was ready to go. Mom was ready to let him go. I was ready to let him go. So, bye, Dad. That was fine. There's interesting stories about after his death, but that may be for a different conversation.
Yes. Yeah.
The thing that I wanted to say is that I was invited to start bringing to companies and individuals what I had gained. Gained is not quite the right word. What I had learned in Burma. And so, in a way, what I see my work doing is helping people to blend their spiritual development with their day-to-day life, and that includes their marriage, and that includes where they work and what they do. These are not two different things.
Sharing. I already can feel my body dropping in, which is awesome. I'm going to frame our conversation, so I'll spend a couple of moments doing that. That said, here's the frame for the conversation we're going to dive into. We all know that COVID has revealed the vulnerability of our systems, the flaws in our approach to business. In this session, we're going to shift from doing into being. And certainly, rather than just talking throughout the entire hour, Greg is going to guide us through 2 exercises that are intended to have you experience what he means by mindfulness or mindfulness practice. And again, as always, we invite you to interact a ton, to ask questions, and just engage. And with that said, let's have just an amazing time together. And Greg, we'll begin with, you recently wrote a piece in which capitalism and consciousness meet at a bar. That's a brilliant idea and a brilliant way to kind of put words on the page. Tell us about the intent of that piece, and how does it relate to the discussion we're having or going to have today?
Okay. Actually, there are people on the Undercurrent team that helped catalyze the notion for this story. It's the women in particular. And capitalism has seemed, in my mind, to be a male-driven process. Mindfulness has more of the feminine side. So, here's the little story I wrote. Capitalism and mindfulness walk into a bar called COVID. Capitalism appears shaky and maybe a little lost. Mindfulness asks, well, what's the problem? And capitalism starts talking a mile a minute about the falling stock market and rising unemployment and projected recession. And then he starts ranting about VUCA. For those of you who don't know, very short, volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous.
VUCA.
So, yeah, VUCA. It's a big deal. And it's a great phrase that refers to our situation. Although it actually was developed by the American military in the Middle East. Different story.
Oh,
so,
interesting.
Mindfulness nods and sips her drink and then offers, I see it different. Want to know what I see? And whether it's his second whiskey or it's her calm demeanor, capitalism slows down, breathes a little deeper, and begins to listen. She says, I see fear. I see anxiety. I see discomfort with uncertainty, which is really fear of losing control. I see the world has entered new territory and there's no map. No one has experience here and there's no leadership that people trust. I see what's needed is happy, healthy human beings who are courageous, collaborative, creative, and compassionate. People who are agile internally and can self-regulate. Then she said, you can be that. I can train you. Are you interested? By this time, capitalism had developed a crush on her. And he'd follow her just about anywhere. Before she turned and walked out the door, she put down her glass and then her card. And on the card, it said all the information that you needed to get into this webinar. Ha! There you go. Here you are.
It's so great. It's so great.
Yeah, I'm glad you like that.
Yeah.
I think that part of what's interesting from my perspective is, you know, as we talk about the COVID situation, yes, there's supply chain snafus. Yes, there's PPE that's not getting to where it needs to be. And to be able to identify the anxiety and the fear, that's happening at a different level. And from my perspective, it's critical to be able to handle that, to be able to manage that, to be able to self-regulate when those things are involved. Because that kind of situation, when anxiety or fear become dominant, then we get kicked into parasympathetic nervous system response, which means that we end up fighting, fleeing, or freezing, which are rarely the actual most creative, collaborative responses to the situation. So mindfulness helps us deal with what is, so that we'll be better able to deal with the difficulties of the external world.
Rob, I'm going to ask you a question here. Okay. I think it would be really great for folks to hear your thought process, you know, going back to working with Howie to design and envision this new version of Undercurrent, and what led you to ultimately making a choice to include several incredible people and professionals who are mindfulness experts and human development experts as part of the team and as part of the service offering.
Thanks, Mark. And Greg, thank you. Actually, I think that's what you just took us through is so perfect. And to me, it's so clear as to why we need mindfulness in business, in capitalism, and essentially in the very systems that breed VUCA, you know, as a regular byproduct. And yeah, Greg, I think we must have met 12 years ago, I think. And you were doing work with a really good friend of mine and all of ours, Alex Boguski at Crispin Porter. I was so enamored with you that I asked if you would consider coming over to the agency that I had founded and doing some mindfulness work with our people. And you very graciously agreed. And it was actually very transformative for some of the people there. And it was transformative for me too. And then we've maintained a friendship ever since. And when we were, you know, it's funny because my journey in sort of rebooting Undercurrent really came out of my own transformation, my own personal transformation, and my own mindfulness practice. And you really kickstarted that for me, Greg. I mean, I don't think I've ever clearly acknowledged that with you, but I'm going to do it here. Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And then, you know, somewhere along the way, worked with Mark, not too long after I met you. Another, you know, clear demonstration of the importance of mindfulness in those practices in the business world. And so when the download happened, if you will, for Undercurrent, and with the idea being about how do we reform capitalism, right? How do we up-level capitalism to where people are thinking about the world generations ahead, and what are we leaving behind, so to speak? You know, what are those? You know, it was also clear to me that there was no way that a company or an organization was going to be able to think multi-generationally or even remotely grasp a concept like how do you make nature a stakeholder? Because if you did both of those things, business would be fundamentally different. It would be completely different, in fact, because you'd have to do things like account for your externalized harm. You know, you wouldn't, unintended consequences would be better, you know, scenario plan, to use a term that we use at Undercurrent. We would just be in a very different game. And so it felt to me and Howie, who's behind the curtain right now, producing this, that we can't really get from here to there without actually helping out the very human beings that reside within the walls of the company. So if the companies are going to make better decisions and have better sense making and ultimately make better choices about humanity and the planet, that they aren't going to do that unless the human beings inside the companies are embracing those values and living and breathing those values. And so the mindfulness component of Undercurrent is it's not just a piece of it, it's actually critically important. And so that is precisely why, you know, Mark, you know, we were in this dance early, and it was clear we needed to call in even more mindfulness experts. And when that happened, it was like Greg was instantly top of mind. It was like, wonder if we can get Greg. I wonder if he'd be interested. And Greg, you graciously said yes again. So thank you.
You're very welcome. And a couple things about this. I just sent an email to Mark and Howie today expressing my gratitude to be able to work with people like them. So, Rob, I feel honored and like my dream team is gathering, and for me to be able to participate in processes like this, having conversations like this, understanding the value of being able to attend to the inner landscape and how that has a massive effect on everything we do in terms of our perspective, in terms of our behavior, in terms of our relationships. This feels like it feels like home.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you.
I want, could I take something that you just said and open it up a little bit more, because I wanted to talk about a theory of how surviving is different than thriving, which is different than flourishing.
Mm.
So,
Yeah, Greg, I think that'd be awesome, and it'd be a nice kind of setup for the first exercise that we want to do.
okay, great,
Yeah,
thank
that's
you.
perfect.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Mark. So from my perspective, surviving is you barely have got your head above water. Maybe you're making it paycheck to paycheck. There's no cushion, there's no backup. And living like that is stressful. The general orientation is that the world is out to get me or hurt me. And the fundamental question is, how can I be safe? Now let's contrast that with thrive. Thrive, if you're thriving, is like you've got all your little ducklings in a row. You've got your workout schedule, you've got a nice home, you've got a 401k, you've got a good diet. So physically you're healthy, financially you're healthy, but the motivation for all of these ducklings to be in a row is for me. So the fundamental question is, what do I get out of it? And the fundamental statement, whoever dies with the most toys wins. So thriving, we've got a lot of people, well, we do have plenty of people that are thriving. However, I propose to you that that person is not emotionally or spiritually as mature as they could be, or as happy. Partly because they haven't opened to the perspective that Rob was referring to, where there's a bigger picture here. And that the sense of fulfillment that comes from being concerned and in wanting to uplift all, that level of fulfillment is a deeper and broader sense of happiness that's interwoven with the bigger picture. So now that individual is not just distinct, but she's also not separate in the way that she's separate when she's thriving.
Yeah.
So here's the last image. So pretend that this is the individual who was thriving. This individual might attack this individual because for some thinking that this one threatens that one. But when this person begins to go deeper into their experience, they leave finger behind. It's not that there is no finger, but the identity of index finger is left behind, and there's a broader, larger, deeper collective. So that very process, by the way, continues beyond hand to wrist, to lower arm, upper arm, torso, entire body, social connections, the entire planet, and expands all. So we spoke briefly earlier about the fight, flight, freeze reaction and how it's rarely a response that is collaborative or creative. So a friend of mine, actually Rob, you were part of the introduction to Jill Bolte Taylor.
Mm-hmm.
So she's a neuroscientist who lives in town here, and now she and I are friends. And one of the things that she has told me is that when the brain gets triggered into that fight, flight, freeze reaction, there's a lot of hormones that suddenly are released into the bloodstream that increase your heart rate, increase your breathing rate, decrease blood flowing to the prefrontal cortex, the executive function, the seat of executive functions like pausing, considering, taking perspectives, deliberately practicing patience. You don't get to do that when you're in fight, flight, or freeze. However, those hormones only stay in the body about 90 seconds. As long as there's not thinking that recreates or it creates a continuous rush of those hormones, cortisol and adrenaline and others. So this exercise I call 90 seconds to safety. So what I would like you to do is to practice being quiet for 90 seconds. And this is what I'd like to ask you to do. I'll cue the 90 seconds. What I want you to do is count your breaths. Because once you have a sense of how many breaths 90 seconds is, you'll be more able to engage this process instead of getting triggered. You can be in any position or any posture that's comfortable. We'll begin counting our breaths about now. So as you're doing this, you're intentionally counting your breaths, not intentionally making them extra long or extra deep, but you might notice that they do become a little longer and deeper because you're being intentional, because you're bringing your awareness to this very ordinary sensation. It's likely that your mind or your attention will wander to other things than your breath. That's okay. Noticing that is the first step to being able to do anything constructive about it. Four, three, two, one, and stop. Would you write into the chat box how many breaths you counted? Chad, 14. Thomas, 20. 13 from Rob. John, Ginny, Ari, 16. Stefan, 15. Mark, 15. Michael, 8.
Wow.
Yeah, Michael.
He's a champ. Wow. That's impressive.
15 from Ruben. 16, 14. Okay. So, team, thank you for putting that information in. What I have found is that in general, for most of us, it's about 15. And we have that more or less for people. And I see somebody is saying, hang in there, Michael. I appreciate that kind of.
Oh, I know. I mean, it's just, that's incredible. Like 8 that's incredible control and dropping in and focus.
Yeah.
Really impressive.
Could be pranayama time.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, you guys, the beauty of counting your breaths is that now you know how long it takes for your brain to disengage from a story that then allows yourself to settle down and be present with what's actually happening, very different than the kinds of thoughts or reactions that can be going while you're in fight, flight, or freeze mode. So I would like to suggest you use this. First place it might be easiest to use is at home, particularly with the kids.
Yeah. I'll nominate myself for that.
Okay? And here's the other thing, depending on the kid and the relationship, invite that kid to do it with you. Then the two of you are beginning to come into a similar orbit instead of being. The other reason that I believe that this really simple practice and short practice is valuable is because there is so much about the current state of affairs that we don't know. And to be resourced enough to be able to have practices that down regulate your anxiety or your fear around not knowing or feeling like you should know or you're supposed to know but you don't know. We're talking about developing what I call fundamental resilience that starts here and then extends out to the family, to the team, to the company, to the culture, to the country, to our world.
I just loved all the responses, all the sharing, and the number of breaths. That's great. Thank you so much for jumping in, gang. Greg, I know that we have another exercise. You want to go right into that? It
Yeah,
feels like we're in a really great space, and let's just keep deepening our practice.
I'd love to, but I want to tee it up
Okay.
using what Undercurrent has already done in the last 5 weeks. I attend these webinars so that I can learn from this incredible team. So the first webinar was scenario planning with Hunter Lovins. One of the things that I took away from that was the importance of a willingness to imagine a different future. And then the steps to prepare for that. COVID-19, most of us didn't see this coming. Bam! In very short time, it had a massive global impact. So my question is, what can we do as human beings to be available, to be responsive to things we can't even imagine? Is that even possible? I propose it is. Then was the Reinvent Everything by Catherine Greener. And she asks this very fundamental question, what problem are we solving? And I propose that today, within this COVID situation, we hardly know what the problem is. What do we need to be able to interact in a collaborative, creative, open-hearted way such that we can begin to frame the problem and then have the resources, the internal resources, to respond effectively. John Bielenberg was up here talking about and guiding us into thinking wrong. And one of the first steps is, wait, what?
Yeah.
We're doing that on a global scale. Wait, we don't even have a choice whether or not to wait. We wait. And some of us are asking, what? And not only that, what if? And to have access to the ability to pause deliberately, and then B, the internal resources to understand that there is opportunity here.
Yeah.
That is a mindset that is gloriously open. We're not saying that there isn't pain and there isn't death and there isn't despair with this situation. We are saying that in addition to that, an open mind is able to perceive more than the darkness.
Yep.
Okay.
Totally agree.
So then we had the great Ari Krishna in The Art of Storytelling. And one of the things that I got from Ari was this question: what stories are we telling ourselves? When you begin to practice mindfulness, you learn the stories that you're telling yourself about you, about her, about him. It can go on and on and on.
It does go on and on.
Those stories affect us, even if we don't know that they're going on. The beauty of knowing that they're going on is that we now have a little bit of elbow room to do something about it. At the very least, to A, recognize it's a thought, B, non-identify with the thought, and allow it to be just a thought instead of marching orders or instead of the truth. The question that Undercurrent has seeded in me is, who do we need to be to deal with our current situation? So I have a few proposed responses. 1, collaborative. 2, creative. 3, and 4, courageous. So let's do an exercise where we engage the body to embody these qualities. Ideally, you're standing up for this exercise. If you need to sit down or stay seated, that's fine, but I'm going to cue it from the feet. If you're sitting down, then use sits bones instead of feet. And if you're sitting down, would you sit at the front edge of your chair? At your feet, that's where you feel the most pressure. Now that is if you're standing. If you're sitting, you feel the most pressure right now at your sits bones, where your buttocks meet the chair. What I want you to understand is that this is grounding. That sensation of pressure, you'll feel some version of this 99.99% of the time that you're on Earth, because it's related to gravity. So when you bring your attention to this pressure, it grounds you, it roots you into right here. Whether you're talking with your boss, whether you're walking with your partner, whether you're snuggling with your child, there'll be some form of pressure that you can use to root into where you are. Okay. So above that, bring your attention to your core and slightly engage your core, 15, maybe 20%. And put your hands on your core, on your belly, and feel the power of those muscles. A strong core is so helpful. Having an engaged sense of power right here. You're sustaining that sense of power through your core, and then you uplift your heart. It's not a big movement, but you're gently pressing your heart forward like the sun coming over the horizon. This is what it's like to be courageous. Your heart is engaged. This is the open door to collaboration and compassion. So, to review, you're rooted through the pressure. You're empowered through your core. you're uplifted through the heart. And tuck the chin just a little bit to lengthen the cervical spine. And imagine at the top of your spine is not an organ encased by bone, but is the sky. Spacious. Room for big ideas. Room for brand new ideas. Last time, review. Rooting through the pressure. Engaged core. Open and uplifted heart. And spacious, spacious mind. So we're almost done. I want you to bring to mind some future event that has a little bit of apprehension connected to it. On a scale of 0 to 10, the apprehension level would be about a 3, a 4, or a 5, not any higher. Just something that you know you have to do or you gotta do, but you don't want to do. Okay, so let that be in your mind and reconnect with the pressure and the rooting process. Reconnect with your core, the power there. Reconnect with your open, uplifted heart. Reconnect with your spacious mind. And bring that thing to mind one more time. And feel how you can be while facing that situation. It may be that the apprehension has decreased, maybe not. But it may also feel that there's a lot more that you have in terms of resources when you go to finally do whatever that is. Releasing the practice, bringing your eyes open if they've been closed, and your attention back to the screen.
Wow. Thank you, Greg. Just so powerful. We have just a few more minutes to play with. So, Rob, do you have any reflections, any thoughts that you'd like to share that are top of mind?
Well, first of all, thank you. That was actually very useful for me, in helping me do a quick little process on some stuff that I'm grappling with. So I appreciate that, and I love that. Yeah, just to move back to something you said a little bit earlier, Greg, from an undercurrent perspective, what we come up against, everybody who's in the sort of, in this, whatever you want to call it, collaborative, we've all dealt with a lot of organizations and companies that really talk about wanting to push forward and even maybe coming out better from COVID. But we're also talking about that a lot before then. And there was this kind of wonderful movement that seemed to be gaining some steam, right? We saw what came out of Davos at the World Economic Forum. We saw what came from the Business Roundtable. We saw a lot of movement that was happening away from kind of this notion of shareholder primacy and thinking, like I said earlier in this Undercurrent Live event, more multi-generationally about the planet and about humanity. But one of the things that always comes up for us is these organizations that love to talk about it, but they really kind of almost see it more as a marketing opportunity. And so for us, or a talent retention opportunity, or before COVID, a talent acquisition opportunity. And the challenge was that a lot of the people inside the company weren't actually embodying the values that they were speaking about. And so we saw a real gap. And a lot of companies were confusing purpose with positioning. And so for us, on one hand, that was a disappointment, but on the other hand, we saw an incredible opportunity to actually put those things, to take those things and sort of examine them, each one of them, and then see if we could actually move away from the positioning piece and move much more into the purpose zone and see if we can get people aligned and embodied in the values that the company was writing into the manifesto or had on the wall, and it wasn't just about the job. And human, and any kind of mindfulness practice wasn't just about the human performance aspect of it and trying to make the company, more profitable, right? It was about getting grounded in things that are actually more important than just the capitalist system that we sit in. And I think I just wanted to note that because the embodiment piece gets left out. And part of the challenge that embodiment, the term, has is sometimes people are like, oh, that's a woo term,
Yeah.
And like, actually it's not, because when you do these kinds of practices, Greg, that you took us through today, and you are feeling it in your body, deeply in your body, and then you can maintain those practices, they become habituated, and then over time, they actually become who you are and what you stand for. And so that's where we see just the biggest opportunity, is to be in that embodiment. And for those people who are watching, like, let's move away from any, kind of wrapping or extraneous associations or projections you're putting on any of that, of the terminology, and move into actually feeling what the words mean.
Yeah. Can I just add to that?
Please.
And then Greg, we'll circle back to you and we'll bring it home and give people an opportunity to know how they can get in touch with you, et cetera, et cetera. So based on what Rob was just sharing, or as Rob was sharing, what occurred to me is that, companies so often, and people within companies so often, operate in that thriving realm. Mm-hmm. So all of the things that you've been addressing are we grab a hold of them in order to ensure that we're thriving as an organization. But I want to acknowledge that in my experience in 10 years in this field, one of the biggest challenges that I've observed over and over and over again is, how do you really build that cohesion? How do you get people to really turn and start facing the things that need to be addressed and explored, et cetera, and transformed? And what I found is it comes down to the process of architecture or architecting. And we're so well trained at architecting or innovating or designing a product, a technology, a system, or a process. And the ask that we're actually making of people is that the architecting that needs to be done is how we relate to ourselves and things in the world at many, many different levels and from many, many different perspectives. And so if any of you who have tuned in have tried to take this conversation into your organizations, into your teams, and have found yourself struggling, part of it is because we're wired to think about design and architecting from product, from service, technology, et cetera, and we're asking people to design and architect from relationship to one another. So that's just my offering. And Greg, I want to turn it over to you for final thoughts and leading us up to sharing just how people can find you and reach out to you in addition to and through Current.
Okay.
Undercurrent, excuse me.
The questions that you are posing and the situations that you are observing, me too. And mostly I work one-on-one. I work with an individual to be able to make these kinds of shifts in her body, with her heart, with her mind. and from there it begins to balloon out. Whether it's so there's lawyers, there's surgeons, there's accountants. So these are people who are doing the inner work and weaving that into their life. Here's the last thing I want us to pay just a little bit of attention to. You know, every day that you're working, that is your life.
Mm-hmm.
Let's not waste it. It will go so fast. Being present for your life as it is. Now, some of that takes courage because there's difficulty or there's pain. So here's a quick practice. I've been working with this one for a long time. You're in the shower. You've done all your shower type things. You might even say, okay, for 10 breaths, I'm going to focus on how nice this feels. And I say, enjoy 9, enjoy 8, enjoy 7, all the way down to 1. And then I turn the water to cold. And my intention is to bring my awareness to that cold water, to where it's touching me, which is radically different than what used to happen, which is instead finding that it's possible to be completely present, completely open, even while the situation is uncomfortable. I sense so much power there. And it's something you can practice every day. If you need to, you turn the water back on warm. All right, so how do you find me? You could find me at thepowerofpresence.net. thepowerofpresence.net. And you can also find me through Undercurrent. It is my intention to do an audio version of the standing, or the what I call groundedness to spaciousness exercise, so that you could have it and practice it and bring it to your meeting, so that you've got this embodied state that has groundedness, clarity, openness, and courage and power, even though it's a difficult meeting. Thepowerofpresence.net is one way to find that recording.
Beautiful. Thank you, Greg.
To me, it's so clear as to why we need mindfulness in business, in capitalism, and essentially in the very systems that breed VUCA, you know, as a regular byproduct. And yeah, Greg, I think we must have met 12 years ago, I think. And you were doing work with a really good friend of mine and all of ours, Alex Bogusky at Crispin Porter. I was so enamored with you that I asked if you would consider coming over to the agency that I had founded and doing some mindfulness work with our people, and you very graciously agreed. And it was actually very transformative for some of the people there, and it was transformative for me too. And then we've maintained a friendship ever since. And when we were, you know, it's funny because my journey in sort of rebooting Undercurrent really came out of my own transformation, my own personal transformation, and my own mindfulness practice. And you really kickstarted that for me, Greg. I mean, I don't think I've ever clearly acknowledged that with you, but I'm going to do it here. Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And then, you know, somewhere along the way, worked with Mark, not too long after I met you. Another, you know, clear demonstration of the importance of mindfulness in those practices in the business world. And so when the download happened, if you will, for Undercurrent, and with the idea being about how do we reform capitalism, right? How do we up level capitalism to where people are thinking about the world generations ahead, and what are we leaving behind, so to speak? What are those? It was also clear to me that there was no way that a company or an organization was going to be able to think multi-generationally or even remotely grasp a concept like how do you make nature a stakeholder? Because if you did both of those things, business would be fundamentally different. It would be completely different, in fact, because you'd have to do things like account for your externalized harm. You wouldn't, unintended consequences would be better, scenario plan, to use a term that we use at Undercurrent. We would just be in a very different game. And so it felt to me and Howie, who's behind the curtain right now, producing this, that we can't really get from here to there without actually helping out the very human beings that reside within the walls of the company. So if the companies are going to make better decisions and have better sense making and ultimately make better choices about humanity and the planet, that they aren't going to do that unless the human beings inside the companies are embracing those values and living and breathing those values. And so the mindfulness component of Undercurrent is it's not just a piece of it, it's actually critically important. And so that is precisely why, Mark, we were in this dance early, and it was clear we needed to call in even more mindfulness experts. And when that happened, it was like Greg was instantly top of mind. It was like, wonder if we can get Greg. I wonder if he'd be interested. And Greg, you graciously said yes again. So thank you.